and welcome to Meet Your Alderman, the podcast that informs Chicago residents about the people who represent them. I'm Sarah Scott, debating a polar plunge this winter.
And I'm Eric Eber, who's starting to think that the Bears might not have a shot at making the playoffs this season. If you haven't listened to the first episode of the Meet Your Government miniseries, which features an interview with Joe Ferguson, we suggest that you go back and listen to Joe's take on the city before diving into the individual topic areas. Today's interview is with Molly Smith, a master's in public policy candidate at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy. She is representing the Police Accountability Group and joined us to dive into one of the most hotly debated and pressing issues facing the city today. We hope you enjoy.
Molly, it's so great to have you on the show. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Molly Smith. I'm a second-year MPP candidate at the Harris School for Public Policy. I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Chicago Policy Review. So if anyone wants to follow up on this with some really great reporting and articles on our website on these similar topics, please check it out. This quarter, I had the privilege of being in Joe Ferguson's Municipal Governance Policy Lab, which was a course at the Harris School. And I worked with Ali Hardebeck, Quinn Kelly, Amelia Perubton, and Jack Reams.
Perfect. I know that you are here to give us kind of a high-level rundown of police accountability, and so I'll just jump right into some of the questions we've prepared for you.
Absolutely.
Can you give us kind of a brief description of what police accountability in Chicago has historically looked like in practice?
In practice, it's looked very different than I think how it was designed. I think that was kind of the biggest takeaway for my group as we were researching this project is that, I think we thought we would look up this accountability structure. It'd be this big, cohesive, holistic oversight structure that all synced together perfectly like a little puzzle. And what we actually found is that there was no real holistic design in putting it all together. It kind of came together piecemeal, usually in the wake of some big crisis where there'd be a lot of public pressure and the people in charge, rather than saying, okay, what we have is not working, let's reevaluate and maybe start from scratch. Instead, what we saw time and time again in Chicago is that there'd be crisis, public outcry, and then Chicago would decide, okay, we'll just tack one extra thing on to the bottom, and then that'll solve everything. And so what we found was there's this design that doesn't really work. There's all these oversight bodies. They're really complicated. Their responsibilities are kind of unclear and a little bit overlapping, but none of them are quite as powerful as they need to be to actually get what they need done. And then the way it actually works in practice is that we're supposed to have a government of checks and balances between the mayor and the city council, and that actually hasn't happened. And so when you look at the police oversight structure, it really comes down to a lot of responsibility falling on the mayor itself. And then these oversight bodies not really being able to do the jobs that they were attempted to design to do.
And do you think that in response to some of those crises that happened historically, the mayor would respond to what the people wanted, or was it more of political moves? We just need to please as many people in office as possible, or as many constituents of our voting bloc?
Well, I can give you a case study that I think really perfectly illustrates this. I know a lot of people here listening who were living in Chicago during the crisis of the Laquan McDonald murder in 2014 will remember this very vividly. I remember the national news reports in the wake of the murder, but it was really, really eye-opening to see what actually happened within the governance structures in the wake of this crisis. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, in 2014, Laquan McDonald, who was a young Black man, he was murdered by a police officer who was on duty. The officer's name was Jason Van Dyke. Over the next year, the city erupted in grief and outcry. The public demanded real accountability. And like I said earlier, rather than taking this moment to take stock of what the oversight body actually is and what it's doing, Chicago instead decided to do what it does best, and it resorted to scapegoating. So the Chicago Police Board, which is supposed to be a civilian oversight body, famously Mayor Lightfoot previously ran the board. we found that they had no real formal policies for consistent and fair discipline. And so the public wanted to know why this police officer hadn't been fired for previous misconduct. All these reports are coming out of all these times previously that he shouldn't have even been in a uniform that day that he was able to murder Laquan McDonald. The current superintendent, his name is Gary McCarthy. He's trying to get out of trouble. He claims that the Chicago Police Board prevented many of the recommended changes that they had made. The Cook County State's attorney, her name was Anita Alvarez at that time, also had a slow response. And a lot of people saw her as having a conflict of interest because a lot of her political campaigns were funded by the police unions. She had a really slow response in actually bringing charges against the police officer. And the state's attorney's office, we learned through this research, doesn't actually often even pursue police matters. And then the mayor at the time, Rahm Emanuel, he was in the middle of an election cycle. So he fought through his city attorney to prevent a taped recording of the murder from being released to the public. And this, of course, a lot of us remember this nationwide, that this was at a time where there was a lot of public pressure on these recordings always being released. And this was a big push for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like finger pointing, he said, she said. There's a lot of trying to either delay or just not have things come to light so that they can essentially get whatever political agenda they need through.
Absolutely. And it gets so wild. So the way the structures are all designed, they all have these powers of who can nominate who can appoint who has to approve who. There's a set process for how you fire and then appoint a new superintendent. The mayor at the time, Rahm Emanuel, decides, okay, we got to scapegoat somebody. I'm scapegoating the superintendent, Gary McCarthy, and he fires him unilaterally. He just fires this guy. Then the process in order to replace the superintendent, at the time it was the police board. It's now moved to another oversight body, but like for all intents and purposes, it's kind of the same now. They go through this 3.5 month, $500,000 search. They look at 39 applicants. For the first time ever, they hold community meetings to get input for this position, which had never been done before. They select 3 finalists for the position. They send those finalists over to the mayor, and then the mayor is supposed to pick from those 3 finalists. Well, Mayor Emanuel decided after all of this had been done that he didn't like any of the finalists, except this arbitrary reason why none of the finalists were good enough. So then he just picked someone else without going through the whole process. So what we learned from this is that the mayor has this unchecked power. City council couldn't or wouldn't, probably is the better word for it. City council wouldn't check him in, wouldn't rein him in at all. And then the mayor pressured the city council to pass legislation. This is crazy. The city council passed legislation declaring that any laws governing the selection process aren't applicable for 30 days so that the mayor can just bypass this whole process. So city council approves this appointment 50-0. No one puts up a fight about it. And then after all of this, the city council never holds the mayor to any kind of account of having any hearing about what are the mayor's future policing policies? What do you think the superintendent is going to do? There's just no accountability for blatantly ignoring all the processes in place. And so this was really eye-opening to my group of there are, again, like technically all these structures that are designed to all work together, but like, what does it actually even mean if in the moment of a real crisis, when the city really needs some accountability, some leadership, some trust in the system, if all of that can just be like brushed aside for 30 days because the mayor has an election coming up?
Oh gosh. Okay. That's definitely a lot. I'm unfortunately not particularly surprised. And like, thank you for giving us that on the ground view of it, because I myself was not in Chicago when that happened. And it's easy to get caught up in some of the bigger headlines without like really understanding what's going on. And maybe once you understand what's actually going on, it's even a bigger problem that the headlines make it out to be. I also am wondering if we should rename this Mayor Accountability Meets Police Accountability, right? Because I think a lot of times it's actually easy for like laymen to like point the finger at the police when behind the police are so many government structures that are just completely enable what's going on.
Absolutely.
My next question is really just about like, how does Chicago rank or compare to like some other cities in America? Like, are they seen relatively middle of the road? Are they seen as kind of worse than others?
Um, no, I mean, Chicago, that was another reason of why we thought that our research was so important, is that outcomes in Chicago actually are really bad. We really should care about this because they're worse in Chicago than other cities. Excessive force allegations in Chicago alone number in the triple digits annually, which is totals almost 60,000 between 1988 and 2018. Chicago spends more money on police misconduct settlements than any other US city besides New York City, which has a population that's 4 times greater than Chicago. And again, this is misconduct settlement. So this is not supposed to be in our city budget as a line item. This is money that's spent because the risk mitigation that the city has in place isn't working. The city does not have an extra millions and millions of dollars laying around to just be putting out in misconduct settlements because they couldn't get their risk mitigation factors in place.
Mm.
Public trust in the police in Chicago is lower than its peer cities. So the public here in Chicago just doesn't have faith in the institutions that are in place. I know we've seen a lot of that nationwide in the last few years, but Chicago's is extremely low. And then officer morale in Chicago is also low. So the suicides among officers in Chicago are higher than the national average. And
Mm.
then Chicago, of course, beats the national average in measures of violent crime, officer to resident ratios, and fiscal spending.
Got it. So overall, Chicago's not doing great in this realm.
Outcomes are not good.
Yes. Okay. Key takeaway. And to be fair, like I think a lot of people have these preconceived notions of Chicago, and I don't think that our goal is to really create fear mongering of any sort. It's truly just like these are statistics that we found, and we all as students are really hopeful, right, that we can create a better system. But I also think that a lot of Chicago residents are hopeful and would like something better than what is there now.
Absolutely. This is a huge part of the city's budget. And so if the city is spending all of this taxpayer money on this system, the city's residents deserve to feel comfortable, to feel safe, and to feel like their money is going to something that is working and is making the city a better place.
And so are there any recent updates to any of the laws or any policies that can give, Chicagoans some hope or something to look forward to in the future?
So we looked into the CCPSA, which is the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability, which we in the class were lucky enough to have Oswaldo Gomez, who is one of our classmates. He's also a candidate for a master's in public policy here at the Harris School. And he is a temporary member of this newly formed oversight body. And he has been instrumental in the group's oversight reports that they've been putting out. So this is a body that is made up entirely of civilians. They are elected in as representatives of different districts. This new structure has authority for reform, community engagement. They're the highest non-mayor authority on high-level policy proposals. They're now the oversight body that can shortlist nominees for the superintendent and send that to the mayor. And so we've just found in the last year, they've only been in existence for a short time. We as a public are still kind of learning what this oversight body will be and what they can do and how they fit within everything else. But what we've seen is they have been holding hearings, which is something that the city council has decided not to do in the last few years. So they're replacing that responsibility. They're holding hearings. They're putting out reports that the public has access to. So they are doing a lot of really important work that hadn't been done before. My group, as we've been doing this research, though, we still feel a little concerned that this body is not as powerful as it could be. We're a little worried that they may just end up being a group that can put sunlight on problems, but not actually solve the problems themselves. Similarly, the Office of the Inspector General here in Chicago has an office that is specifically focused on public safety. So the Public Safety Inspector General, or PSIG, they're just focused on investigating patterns and practices within the police department. This is a relatively new office, and they put out tons of reports looking into all of this. Their reports were really crucial during our research phase. That's really important to have this body that has lots of power. They can subpoena people, they can interview anyone, they have access to any records that they want within government. Really, really important to have that. But again, that group is all about sunlight. It's not about actual reform and instituting new policies. So there's reason to be hopeful that at least we're going to know what the problems are going forward, but it's still going to take a lot of work to be able to resolve them all.
Right. I think it sounds like Chicago's in kind of a critical period, right? We're about to have a new election. There's a lot of people going out of city council. There'll be a lot of new blood coming in. And 2023 might just be a chance for a new slate, right? We have these, right, both of the organizations you stated that will not be subject to election overturn, I'll call it, right? And so there'll be a little bit of like that institutional knowledge or institutional history, as short as it may be, going into kind of this next term.
I hope so. Yeah. And I hope, I will certainly be a lot more aware of all of these issues as we go into the campaign season in earnest. And so I know a little bit more about the information that I'm going to be looking for from city council members and mayor candidates. And I hope your listenership kind of feels the same way, that these are really, really important issues. And we do need to hold someone accountable for forcing all of them and leading us into a better tomorrow.
Great. Thanks so much, Molly.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes in this mini-series on city council, the budget, and community engagement. Special thanks to Molly Smith for taking time out of her winter break to come on the show, and to her team members, Ali Hardebeck, Quinn Kelly, Amelia Perupchin, and Jack Reams for all their hard work on this project. Shoutouts to Harrison Lee for sound engineering help, Olivia DePriel for our logo design, and the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcast Group. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.